So as somebody then who focuses on the book part of this, who reads them, therefore is seeing how over time the scholarships evolve, the different foci of, what they want to talk about Churchill. Have you seen an evolution? Is there something that stands out to you in, say, the last generation where you think, boy, they've really shifted on this?
Yes, absolutely. In the last generation, there are more untruths about Churchill because of the internet than there ever were in his lifetime. He is accused of every conceivable crime and misdemeanor that suits every conceivable faction politically. And the thing that I'm always saying to people is read the work and focus on the nuances of the man. There was no simple event in Churchill's career. Everything had context, he always generally understood what and why he was doing what he was doing, and also looking to the future and could see, in many cases, imagine the ramifications. This didn't protect him from making some terrible mistakes along the way, which I also think are fascinating. One of the things I like about him is that he's a guy who learned from his mistakes generally and made some doozies, but as a result had learned enough and had enough defeat to recognize and seize the moment in World War II. It was all preparation, which he almost said very early on in his career, that he believed he had been born to save the world from a great dictator at some point. All of the experiences were schooling him. And people tend to freeze an action in the moment, particularly if it suits their narrative, and use it against the man. And the internet spreads it, far beyond anything that Churchill ever wrote. Spread his published works. So it's terrifying how misdirected all of this is, because it becomes history, and it's not.
Do you find that your customers are focused on any particular, of late at least, of a particular area, or in the, not just books, but in things that you might sell beyond books? Is there anything in particular that seems to draw them? And if so, what is it you think that makes him special? You've touched on some of it already, but what is it that makes people want to keep going in this world?
Well, one of the things, aside from the fact that his impact was so enormous because of World War II, without him standing up as he did and the way that he did, we all would very possibly be speaking German today. The Germans had a plan for invading the United States. They had a very elaborate and as well thought out as their other military expeditions were. So we were not going to be excused from this if Europe fell. So the fact that Churchill stood up for that and to him is probably the most important thing that people want to read about and understand. And some of the young people, and when I say young, I mean 20 to 40, who have no idea who he is. And I have some very heavy, some very mighty intellects upstairs who are some of the hand-picked student population of this country who've been brought to these companies, and they have no idea who Winston Churchill is. Or they have a very vague idea who he is. To their credit, some of them come in and ask me questions and buy books. And the first thing they have to learn about is just what he did in the Second World War. But the thing that I came to believe, I looked at Saul Steinberg at one point early on, and I thought, Saul thinks that he's Winston Churchill, and that's why he wants to collect Churchill. He believes, he sees himself in Churchill, but I've come to believe that everybody who buys a book about Churchill sees themselves in Churchill, but in a different way. I look at him and I think that he's, this holistically minded, nurturing individual, and others just think that he's a really cool painter, and others think that they want to rule the world the way Winston Churchill did for a time. But he's so prismatic that everybody can find something in it.
Let me circle back. You brought up the point about young people, and you've watched generations of young people come through.
I have, haven't I?
Is there something you think that could be done better to bring people to see Churchill the way you did when you were younger, and not just because we have a generation now coming of age where their grandparents, even maybe their grandparents didn't serve in the war, aren't alive to talk about the war, which obviously, as you mentioned, that's that pivot point, 1940 in particular, for so many people, is something that is so tangible to people who had family they could talk to. but that's gone now. Is there something else that can be done to maybe bring Churchill and specifically that part of his history to light in a way that maybe is not being done well at this point?
Aside from turning off their phones, no. It's all on everything's on the internet and nothing's on the internet. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. No, they have to come to it themselves, and I don't think that it necessarily requires a parent who served in the war. Our times are perilous. They resemble Churchill's pre-war times in many aspects, but in a mirror image. If they're driven, and they are being driven to a certain degree to explore Churchill, because a lot of people come in here, even young people, and say, what are we going to do? Who is this Churchill guy, and what did he do? So it has to come from wanting to learn from his experience to apply it to our times could not be more dire, so they should experience Churchill that way, and then he becomes their Churchill and not their parents' Churchill.